On the 26th of June, the palace did something no British monarch had ever done. It opened its own books. The king told the public, for the first time in 1,000 years of crowns, exactly how much tax he paid. £12.9 million, enough to put him among the 100 biggest taxpayers in Britain. And the headlines called it transparency. But here is the thing about a magician. When both his hands are suddenly open and empty, that is exactly the moment you should be watching his feet. Because the same morning the king opened the books, he closed a door. After a refurbishment that cost £369 million and took 10 years, Charles announced he will never live in Buckingham Palace. Not once. He and Camilla will stay next door at Clarence House for the rest of his reign. So the nation just paid a fortune to restore a palace, and the man it was restored for is not moving in. A house no king will sleep in. Hold on to that picture. We are going to come back to it. Now look. To understand why a king would empty his own palace and open his own wallet in the same breath, you have to go back. Not to this year. To the wound underneath all of it. The one this family has been managing for almost 30 years. You remember it. In 1994, Charles sat in front of a television camera and admitted he had been unfaithful to Diana. He said it out loud to the whole country. And everyone watching knew the name he did not have to say. The next year, 1995, Diana sat for her own camera in that quiet voice and said there were 3 people in her marriage. 3? In a marriage that was supposed to belong to 2. Where were you the night Charles confessed on television? A lot of you have told me you were folding laundry. You were putting children to bed. And you stopped and you felt something turn because she was the wronged one. Everybody could see it. The whole country could see it, and the palace could see it, and it has never stopped being true. Then August of 1997, Paris, a tunnel. She did not come home. She was 36 years old, and the woman the country never forgave became, in a single night, the woman the country could never replace. That is the wound. Everything that has happened since, every title, every marriage, every quiet transfer of a house sits on top of it. And I cannot tell you the palace thinks about Diana every day. No one outside that family can, but I can tell you the public does. And a monarchy that lives or dies on public feeling does not get to forget what the public refuses to forget. So keep the wound in mind, because the people moving around it now are about to show you exactly where they stand. Let me tell you about William. He was 15 years old, and they put him in a dark suit and walked him behind his mother's coffin in front of the whole world. Most children grieve behind a closed door. William grieved on live television with millions of strangers watching his face for a crack that he was not allowed to give them. He learned something that week that he has never unlearned. He learned what this institution costs and who pays for it. That boy is 43 now, and the man he became is not sentimental. That is the thing everyone close to him says in one form or another. Charles leads with his heart. William leads with a plan. And honestly, after the childhood he had, can you blame him? Watch what he actually controls now, because this is real, not rumour. In 2022, the moment his grandmother died, William inherited the Duchy of Cornwall. That is the engine. A private estate worth over £1 billion. The money that funds the heir and his family. He inherited it by blood, the way it has passed for 700 years. This year, when he published his own tax, £7.76 million, he also did something small and very telling. There is a closed prison on Duchy land, Dartmoor, that used to pay him £1.5 million a year in rent. He gave it away, sent it to the local community instead. Now, a cynic says that is good public relations, maybe. But here is what I cannot ignore. A man who hands back £1.5 million a year is a man building a story about what kind of king he intends to be. He's not waiting for the crown. He's already rehearsing it quietly, line by line, and he is not doing it alone. Here is where Anne walks in, the king's sister, the hardest working, least dramatic person in that entire family. She does not give interviews. She does not leak. She just shows up year after year and does the duty. And she has the longest memory in the building. Anne knew Camilla's whole world long before Diana ever did. Back in the early 70s, before Camilla married Andrew Parker Bowles in 1973, it was Anne who was close with him. She has watched this exact pattern, this exact circle of people for 50 years. So when the family starts deciding who belongs to its future and who was only ever a guest, Anne is not learning the story. She lived it. That is the patient plan. A king who leads with his heart, stepping back, an heir who leads with a plan, stepping forward, and a sister who forgets nothing, standing right behind him. The question is, what happens to everyone who is not Diana's blood? And that is where it gets interesting, because not everyone is going quietly. Let me be careful here, and I will mark this as me thinking out loud because it matters. What I am about to read you is a real event. What it means is my opinion. Keep those two things separate the way I do. In late February of this year, while the whole country was staring at one royal scandal, Camilla quietly did something with the one thing in this world that was truly hers. Ray Mill House. A house in Wiltshire she bought in 1996 for £850,000 of her own money right after her divorce. Not a crown property, not a grace and favour gift. The one home no one in that palace ever gave her and no one could ever take. For 30 years, it was her private corner of the earth. And she signed it over to trustees acting for her two children, Tom and Laura. The papers floated the word sold. The people around her said no, not a sale, just family planning, long arranged. Fine, let us take them at their word. It was legal, it was tidy, it was on paper the most ordinary thing a wealthy mother ever does. But you have to ask yourself about the timing, because she did this in the exact same window that the other scandal was tearing through the family. People do not move the one house that was ever truly theirs for no reason. So here is the question I cannot put down, and I will only ever ask it as a question. Is that just estate planning? Or is that a woman quietly carrying the one thing that is hers out of the building before the reign changes hands and the locks get changed? Make of the timing what you will. I have made of it what I will. A house no king will sleep in. And that same season, a house its owner quietly moved into her children's hands. The cameras were on the empty palace. They were not on the side door. Now, the other scandal, the one everyone was actually watching. Let us talk about Harry, because the loudest story about him this year is the one that never happened. You heard it. Maybe you believed it. The story that Charles sat in a private room, opened a folder and signed Harry out of the line of succession, erased him permanently, and I understand why it spread. It feels true. After everything, the stepping back in 2020, the interviews, the book, it feels like the kind of ending this story should have. But it is not real, and here is why it cannot be. The line of succession is not the king's to edit. It is set by law, by the Act of Settlement going back to 1701 and the Succession to the Crown Act of 2013. To remove a living person from it, you do not need a pen. You need Parliament. The Commons, the Lords, royal assent, and the agreement of 15 other countries where the king is also head of state. 16 realms, not one folder, not one signature in a quiet room. So no, Harry was not signed out. Go and look right now today. He's still there, fifth in line, exactly where his birth put him. He stepped back from the job in 2020. He gave up the duties, the funding, the working role, but the job and the bloodline are two different things. He lost the first. The second is not the king's to take. And that is the whole point I have been circling. You can sign a house over, you cannot sign over blood, which brings us to the reckoning, the part where the scales actually move. Not because anyone in a dark suit decided to move them, but because they were always going to. You want to know what real consequence looks like in this family? It is not a rumour. It is a man named Andrew, the king's own brother. Last October, Charles stripped him of the title of prince and put him out of his home near Windsor. And then in February, on his 66th birthday, the police arrested him on suspicion of misconduct in public office tied to his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein, the first senior royal arrested in nearly 400 years. He has denied wrongdoing. The investigation is ongoing and the law will decide. Not me, not you. But sit with what that means. For decades, this family protected Andrew. He was the untouchable one. And the institution still let him fall. Why? Here is my reading, and I will own it as mine. Because he was the one they could afford to lose. The law reached the one they could afford to lose, and the message that sent through every corridor of that palace was unmistakable. Proximity to the throne protects no one, not a prince, not a brother. And the people paying closest attention to that message are the ones whose standing is borrowed, not bloodline. Because that is the quiet rule under everything. A consort's role does not belong to the person. It belongs to the reign. Diana's tiara, the sapphire one, is worn now by Catherine, not by anyone else. The duchy passed to William by blood. The crown that is coming runs in one line, and it is Diana's line. Nobody has to take anything from anyone. The structure already decided centuries ago what is permanent and what was only ever on loan. And here, right at the end, is the part most channels miss. They want a villain in a room with a pen. They want Charles striking someone down. But look again, Charles is not striking. Charles is stepping back, a king with cancer in his late 70s who just told the world he will not even live in his own palace. That is not a man seizing power. That is a man setting it down, carefully, in the direction it was always going to go. So picture it one more time. The refurbishment is finished. The lights come on in Buckingham Palace, all 369 million pounds of it. And no king sleeps there. A house no king will sleep in yet, because it is not empty. It is waiting. Holding the door for the next reign and the next king is Diana's son. That is the whole story they dressed up as a tax return. They opened the books to keep you from reading the room. The transparency was real. It was also the cover. And underneath it, a court was quietly carrying its valuables out the side door, while the law took the one it could spare. and the line of succession sat exactly where no signature could ever reach it. This was never revenge. Nobody had to lift a hand. The rules were written long before any of these people were born, and the rules simply, quietly, finally read themselves out loud. Diana lost the marriage, she lost the title, she lost her life on a road in Paris at 36. But the throne that is coming carries her blood, her son, and her grandson behind him. And no folder, no signature, no quiet transfer in any season ever written can move that. So let me leave you where I always do, with you. Where were you that August morning in 1997 when the news came through? I read every comment, and I mean that. Tell me where you were standing, and tell me, honestly, whether you ever imagined it would come around like this.